I'm Frédéric Desbiens from the Oracle Mobile Platform team. In other episodes, you learned about the security features of the Oracle Mobile Cloud Service and how MCS Authentication works under the hood. In this one, I will show you how you can write code to authenticate against MCS using the iOS Client SDK. But enough talk, let's get this demo started. For this demo, I will use a brand new app created in Xcode. I selected the single view application template. I added text boxes for the username and password to the only seen in the generated storyboard, as well as a button. I added pointers to those text boxes in the view controller class. In the case of the button, I created an action connection. I also configured the app to use the MCS Client SDK. I'm not showing this here since this has been covered in another episode. To implement authentication, there are three things you must do. First, you must specify some imports in the class where you will write your code. At a minimum, you should add ONC Authorization.h, ONC Mobile Backend.h, and ONC Mobile Backend Manager.h. You may need to import additional header files if you wish to use specific platform APIs such as storage or notifications, for example. The second step is to obtain an instance of the ONC Authorization class. This is done by calling the Authorization method on an ONC Mobile Backend object. In this case, I simply use the default backend for the application, which I get through the Mobile Backend Manager. If you wish to execute specific logic once the authentication process is over, you can optionally implement a completion block to do so. The type of the block must be Authorization Auth Completion Block as defined in ONC Authorization.h. For the purposes of the demo, I simply log the success or failure of the authentication attempt. A real application will do other things here, such as navigating to another activity, for example. Finally, the last step is to call the Authenticate method. There are two overloads for that method. The first one expects you to provide the username and password. It will return an NS error if authentication failed and nil otherwise. The second overload, which I am using in my code here, does not have a return value and rather adds a third parameter for the completion block. The signature for that block includes an NS error parameter. By the way, you need to call the Authenticate Anonymous method even if you do not require your mobile users to authenticate. Anonymous access to MCS resources is only possible if headers for the anonymous access key and mobile backend ID are set. One last thing I need to complete my application is to call my authentication method at the appropriate place inside the method, which is the action connection for the button. Done. Let's now see what happens at runtime when the mobile users authenticate successfully. If logging has been activated in the MCS SDK properties, you will see entries such like these in the application's log. I now have implemented authentication. Let's now spice things up a bit and retrieve the profile properties for the current mobile user. In order to do that, you must do two things. The first is to define a completion block. This block must be of type ONC User Registration Completion Block with User. Hey, nobody told me there will be tongue twisters in that script. Anyway, the second parameter for the block is of type ONC User and will contain values for all the properties defined in the realm associated to the mobile backend. I need to import oncuser.h for my code to compile. Once again, I simply add logging statements to my implementation, but a real application would probably keep a copy of the ONC user object somewhere. The second thing you must do to retrieve user properties is to call the getCurrentUser method on a valid ONC authentication instance on which the Authenticate method has been called successfully. Since both methods are called asynchronously, I cannot simply chain the two calls one after another. The easiest way to do it is to call getCurrentUser inside the completion block I defined for Authenticate. If I do that, I need to define the authentication instance as a private class variable. This is what you get in the application logs at runtime. We see the debug output from the framework as well as the logging statement I added to my completion block. The main takeaway from this demo is that the MCS Client SDK really encapsulates the complexities of authentication. Yes, you need to write some code in order to authenticate, but this code will stay the same across all the authentication technologies supported by the SDK. This really shows how the SDK makes you more productive. That's all for now. Thank you for watching and see you next time.